Okay, I want to do a introduction to inverse functions, which will help us later on with our calculus. So basically, in any given function, we can produce a set of ordered pairs. So for instance, for fx equals 2x, for x equals, sorry about that. So for x equals 1, y equals 2, x equals 2, 4, 5, 10, etc. Okay, so you get ordered pairs from that function. Okay, so that's nothing new. Copy that and come across when you're ready. Okay, so what we're going to do is now look at an inverse function which enables you to go from the second number of the ordered pair back to the first number. So for instance, if y equals 2x, which is our example, what we need to do is find out how we can reverse it. And there's two steps. So the first step is you switch the letters, so y becomes x and x becomes y, and then we just make y the subject of that new formula there. So just divide by 2. So this is a formula where we could go, say, like the coordinate was 5, 10, we can go from 10 back to 5 by halving it. And this is called the inverse function. Copy that and come across. Okay, so let's have a look. So the first one was y equals 2x, and the other one was y equals a half x. Now they're both going to go through the origin. So for first one, y equals 2x, we've got 2, we've got 4, and then if I make a straight line between those points and then going through the origin, it looks like that. And take back to pen. Now for the second one, for half x, 2 equals 1, 4 equals 2. Make a straight line for those guys. Oh, so I'm a little bit out there. So it has to go through the origin. Let's see if I can just drag that down a bit. Okay, that looks a bit better. Drag that up. Okay, so that looks better. And what you can see, or what you maybe can't see, is if I put y equals x in between those lines, and then I make a straight line with another colour. And to make the pen. Okay, this line y equals x, these two lines, the function and the inverse, are mirror images of each other in the line y equals x. So the function and the inverse are mirror images of each other in the line y equals x. And that's what we're going to find whenever we do inverses. They're going to be a mirror. Any inverse will have a mirror in y equals x. So copy that and come across. Okay, so we're just looking at notation. So if the function has the letter f, then the inverse is f minus 1. And we'll find out later that f does not equal 1 over f. Like in terms of negative indices, does not apply. Okay, and we can actually find a function if it's going to have an inverse. We do this thing called a horizontal line test. Now I know we had a function test. If a line's a function, it has a vertical test, but for a function to have an inverse, it's a horizontal line test cutting at one spot. So if I look back at that one, if I make a horizontal line, that function gets one cut, so that function will have an inverse, which we have found. Okay, and okay, back to there. So a function has an inverse if it's a horizontal in one spot only. So copy that and come across. Okay, so now we're looking at domain and range. So the domain are your x values and your range is your y values. And what we're going to find is the domain is between x in between a and b, and when we sub in the a, we'll get f of a, and we sub in the b, we'll get f of b, whatever those values are. So the domain is between a and b, and the range is between fa and fb. But for the inverse, what's going to happen is the range of the function becomes the domain of the opposite, and obviously the domain has x values, and the domain of the first becomes the range of the second. Because what we're trying to do is, like for instance, we had that 1, 2, 5, 10. Okay, these are your domains normally, but what we're trying to do is we're trying to go backwards, and so you're going to have this switch over. So copy and come across. Okay, so here's how for instance, y equals a half x, I've got a restricted domain, okay? It's a restricted domain, so the domain is between 0 and 8, and if I've got that as your function, the range will be 0 to 4 by just substituting half of 0, half of 8, okay, from substitution. So to find the inverse, first thing, like y equals a half x is the original, and then you switch the letters x and y over, then make y the subject. So the inverse is y equals 2x, and the range of the first becomes the domain of the second, and the domain of the first becomes the range of the second. Okay, so copy that and come across. We've got one more slide to go. One more slide. Okay, so I want you to have a go at these ones yourself. I want you to find, so find inverse function and find domain and range of the inverse. Okay, so there's a few things you have to do. So find the inverse function and then find the domain and range of the inverse. So I want you to have a go at those. This should be straightforward, I hope. And when you're ready, come back live. Okay, you're back. So that's the domain, and let's find the range straight away. So when I put -1 in there, -1 plus 1 is 0, the square root of 0 is 0, less than or equal to y. 3 plus 1 is 4, the square root of 4 is 2, so that's the range. Okay, so to find the inverse, x equals y plus 1 square rooted, and x squared equals y plus 1, so y equals x squared minus 1, so that's the inverse. And then the domain is 0 less than or equal to x less than or equal to 2, so the range becomes the domain, and the domain becomes the range. And don't forget, you've got to switch the letters. So domain is x, range is y, and we just switch the numbers over. Okay, the next one. Okay, so that's the domain, x is greater than 0. So when I stick 0 in, I get -2. -2 squared is 4, and so it's greater than or equal to 4 is the answer. So basically, this is a parabola, x minus 2 squared. It looks like that, and so we're saying, so we're saying if, so it's a little bit trickier than I thought. So yeah, if x is greater than 2, actually it's a little bit harder. We've got to actually think about the parabola. So it's actually going to be, I'm glad I sketched it. So x minus 2 is a parabola. So if x is greater than 0, then y will be greater than or equal to 0. So I'm glad I sketched it, because that would have been a huge error. Okay, so the inverse, x equals y minus 2 squared. So plus or minus the square root of x equals y minus 2. So y equals positive 2 plus or minus the square root of x is your function. So don't forget, you've got an even power, so you have to put plus or minus in front. And the domain is, it's going to be the same, because when you switch it, you don't have any changes. Okay, that's the end of the video. Thanks for coming.